All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're tracking something really fascinating, the lifelong, nonlinear journey of an authentic leader. This is specifically tailored for executives or really any emerging leaders out there who want to understand how to sustain high performance over decades rather than just burning out or fading away. We're going to look at leadership not as a final destination, but as a continuous, ongoing evolution. So let's start by asking ourselves this crucial question. What actually happens when a highly successful leader suddenly derails or just kind of loses their way? We've all seen it, right? Brilliant, highly competent executives who reach the absolute top, only to derail spectacularly or maybe just quietly lose their edge. Why does this happen? Well, because as the research shows, leadership isn't just a static peak you reach and set up camp on. It's a continuous cycle of growth, disruption, and reinvention. And frankly, if you weren't actively managing that cycle, you're already falling behind. So to figure out how to prevent that derailment, we're going to map out the entire leadership life cycle today. We'll cover the threat of stagnation, finding your true north, adopting a growth mindset, navigating identity disruption, and finally, reinventing your retirement. First step, section 1, the threat of stagnation and how to avoid the C-suite trap. You know, it's lonely at the top, isn't it? When you reach the C-suite, a really dangerous thing happens. You suddenly have way fewer colleagues in a position to actually question and challenge you. This isolation can lead to what the executive search firm Boyden calls attitudinal sclerosis, which is basically a refusal to adapt because the old ways just feel comfortable. And this stat right here brilliantly illustrates why that kind of stagnation is literally fatal. Recent data highlights that remote and hybrid work is up by 84%. I mean, that is huge. It's just one example of how rapidly the business landscape shifts. If you're an analog leader trying to operate in a digital hybrid world, your skills are going to become obsolete fast. Static leaders will simply be left in the dust by competitors who are actively evolving. So how do we combat this isolation and stagnation? You need a leadership development plan, or an LDP. Now hold on, I am not talking about some basic HR checkbox exercise here. Boyden refers to a true LDP as a dynamic career sat-nav, or GPS. It's supposed to be a fluid, continually evolving framework that tracks your progress and helps you correct your course the second you start to stray from your optimal path. This dynamic plan basically breaks down into 4 concrete phases. A successful LDP starts with an initial assessment. So, deeply understanding your strengths and weaknesses, often through 360-degree feedback and psychometrics. Next is development, which means deliberately choosing your learning opportunities. Then comes action planning, where you set specific timelines. And finally, evaluation and accountability. And for C-suite leaders, that accountability piece is absolutely critical. And honestly, it's usually best achieved through an executive coach who isn't afraid to give you the unvarnished truth. I absolutely love this next concept for executing your plan. Boyden suggests you need to manage like a decathlete, but connect like a DJ. Think about it. A decathlete isn't the absolute best in the world at every single event, right? Instead, they strategically manage their weaknesses so they don't tank the overall performance while heavily leveraging their core strengths. But you also have to connect like a DJ. A DJ has immense technical knowledge, sure, but their true magic is reading the room and connecting authentically with the audience in the moment. At the end of the day, your qualifications aren't what will inspire your team, your ability to relate to them well. Moving right along to section 2, finding your true north, which is all about the internal work. Because, let's face it, external frameworks can only take you so far on their own. Guided by Bill George's research shared by the CFR Institute, we have to find your true north. This is your unique moral compass. It's that deep inner sense of what you actually want to accomplish in your life. And what's really interesting is that this compass is usually forged by overcoming severe personal and professional challenges. George calls these intense challenges crucibles. Overcoming a crucible, whether that's a massive early career failure, a personal loss, or facing discrimination, is exactly what builds the inner confidence you need to lead authentically. The absolute key here is understanding your motivation. If you get caught up in superficial, extrinsic motivations, chasing money, fame, titles, or sheer power, it will inevitably pull you completely off course. George's research makes it super clear that leaders who jump into roles just to get ahead often fail. On the flip side, intrinsic motivation, that genuine desire to serve and a much deeper sense of purpose, that is what anchors your authenticity and keeps you on track. Former Johnson & Johnson CEO Jim Burke really hit the nail on the head here. Without a moral compass, you're awash in chaos. That perfectly captures the risk of losing your way. Without that true north, external pressures and the seduction of power will literally just wash you away. George highlights stories of incredibly successful leaders who drifted straight into disaster simply because they chased external validation and lost their moral compass. And this is exactly why it's absolutely vital to maintain a peer support group. You need people around you who know the real you and who actually have the courage to tell you when you're acting out of alignment with your own values. All right, Section 3, adopting a growth mindset and becoming the lifelong learner. Once you've got your compass set, actually executing on it requires continuous growth. And the data from psychologist Carol Dweck's research, shared by Spark Success, is incredibly striking. Take a look at this. Employees in organizations that foster a growth mindset are 47% likelier to see their company as supportive of risk-taking. Plus, they're significantly more committed to the company's goals. So, a growth mindset isn't just a nice, fluffy personal trait. It is a hard, structural, competitive advantage that drives greater innovation, collaboration, and resilience across your entire organization. And fostering that mindset can start with something as simple as teaching your team the power of one tiny word, yet. Saying, I haven't learned this skill yet, is totally transformative. It normalizes the idea that our abilities aren't fixed. It reminds everyone that learning and growth are ongoing journeys, not just final destinations you either arrive at or fail to reach. But listen, as an executive, you can't just mandate this stuff from a corner office. You have to actively model it. You do this by transparently sharing your own learning journey and your own setbacks. You celebrate what we like to call first attempts in learning, or fail, to show your team that setbacks are just data for the next attempt. And you deliberately praise the effort and the courage of your team, not just the flawless outcomes. That is how you foster a truly resilient culture. Which brings us to Section 4, navigating identity disruption, the crucible of change. Because as you push yourself in your organization forward, you are absolutely going to hit periods of internal friction. This fascinating thesis out of Altone University brilliantly illustrates that leadership development is not some smooth, linear progression up a ladder. It's actually a recursive cycle. As you face new challenges, your current identity as a leader gets disrupted. You literally have to break down your old assumptions about who you are and rebuild a newer, more mature leader identity to meet that new context. So what actually causes this friction? Well, the research identifies some very specific triggers. Maybe it's that jarring transition from being the go-to subject matter expert to suddenly being a people leader. Or it might be the really painful tension of trying to balance hard performance metrics with compassionate people management. Or it could even be a clash between your personal values and the organization's practices. These are what we call identity disruptive experiences. And yeah, they are incredibly uncomfortable, but they are the exact catalysts that force you to adapt and mature. And finally, Section 5, reinventing your retirement, the next chapter. Eventually, this whole cycle extends beyond the boardroom. Insights from the Building Blocks curriculum show us that we really need to completely shift our paradigm when it comes to retirement. For a high-performing executive, suddenly staring at an empty calendar can feel like a devastating loss of relevance and identity. The key here is to stop thinking about what you are retiring from and start deliberately planning what you are retiring into. It's all about reinvesting your energy into a meaningful new phase of intentional growth. Think about it. You've spent decades honing these incredible skills: high-stakes decision-making, strategic vision, complex problem-solving, and those are still incredibly valuable. You can absolutely channel them into deeply fulfilling post-career paths. You might join advisory boards, mentor the next generation of business leaders, volunteer your expertise, or finally pursue continuing education in a field you've just always been curious about. You get to maintain your intellectual engagement and your impact, but you get to do it entirely on your own terms. So as we wrap up this explainer mapping out your lifelong leadership evolution, from avoiding the C-suite trap to leaning right into identity disruptions, all the way to reinventing your retirement, I really want to leave you with this provocative thought. You have spent a lifetime learning how to lead others. But as you enter your next chapter, what is the true north that will lead you? Take the time to find out. Thanks so much for joining me today.